Hey everyone, welcome back. It's me, Jordan, with the Tutorium in Intensive English at UIC. Today's lesson is on the past continuous. So, like always, let's talk about what's going on today. We will look at some examples with the past continuous verb tense. We'll learn the grammar rules for the past continuous. And of course, we will practice just a little bit. So first, let's look at some sentences. Walk. Fran and Terry were walking to the office at 8:30 a.m. Clean. Becky was cleaning the sink, or Stephen was cleaning the sink when Becky entered the kitchen. Jenna was reading essays while Sally was working on lesson plans. So again, like always, those bold words, those dark words, the be plus the verb, were or was, that's the past continuous. That's what it looks like. Before we start talking about structure and all that, let's at least talk about some of our time words, and that will help us with learning the rules. So our first rule, well, we see this time word at 8:30 a.m. So what we know about past continuous is, of course, it's about sometime in the past, just like the simple past, right? It occurred at some point in the past. Okay. But the feeling is a little bit different. When we see the past continuous, we think of a process. We imagine something happening for a longer period of time. So again, what were they doing at 8:30 a.m.? They were walking. They were in the process of walking. We can imagine them going down the sidewalk, going down the street. It feels like a much longer time than just they walked to the office. So a question that past continuous answers is, what were you doing? So what were you doing all weekend? What were you doing on Monday? What were you doing all last year? It feels like a much longer process. Next, let's look at our second sentence. So Stephen was cleaning the sink when Becky entered the kitchen. This word when tells us that there was some kind of interruption in the past. Notice we have the longer process, was cleaning, in past continuous. And then suddenly Becky entered. So maybe Stephen stopped cleaning the sink when she came in, but we know he was in this process of cleaning when, boom, something happened that maybe made him stop. Becky entered. Rule number 3. When we're talking about these two past activities occurring at the same time, usually this, we know that we need to use this when we see the word while. So while two things are happening, or three things or whatever, but things are occurring at the same time. So Jenna was reading essays, and then maybe next to her in the same room somewhere, Sally was working on lesson plans. They were both in this process of doing this at the same time. Now let's look at the structure. So in the first sentence, we see were walking. What a second sentence, was cleaning. Third sentence, was reading, was working. So what do you notice about this verb tense? Well, first of all, we see the past tense of be. We also see a verb with ing. So our rule number 4 is you choose either was or were, and then you add your verb plus ing. So we have to pay attention to our subject. Let's look at some examples with walk. So our subject, I was walking. You were walking. He, she, it was walking. We were walking. They were walking. Now, I also have some stars around he, she, it because many students confuse the he, she, it verb. So keep in mind, again, this one is a little different. He was, she was, it was. Now let's practice a little bit with this concept. So as we practice, there are some questions you'll want to ask yourself. Am I using simple past or past continuous? What's the subject of the sentence? Because that tells us was or were. That's important. Let's look at some examples. So they sleep when the doorbell rang. Now notice we have this word when. There's an interruption, something that interrupts the sleep, and it's the doorbell. We also notice that rang is past tense. So now let's think about what can we do with sleep. We're going to use past continuous. That's a process. We see the word they. Okay, what do we use with they? Was or were? Were. So they were sleeping. Now there's something I want you to notice, that in this example, we are using they for one person. This is kind of a newer conversation in English language. Let's talk about why you might use they for some people in English. Well, we use they for a few different reasons. But first of all, you might use they because we shouldn't or we don't assume other people's gender identities. So when you meet someone and you do not know their gender, and if you don't know that person, you do not know their gender, you shouldn't assume their gender. Don't use he or she, because maybe that person doesn't use he or she. Maybe their gender is something different than what you assume. So it's safer and more polite to use they until you ask them what their pronouns are. Another thing is some people use they pronouns. Some people don't use words like he or she, and that's okay. Some people identify as they. So, how do we find out which pronouns people use? You can ask them. Just ask, what are your pronouns? And they can tell you or not tell you. Anyway, another thing that you can do is introduce yourself with your pronouns, and that might make the other person feel safer. You can introduce your pronouns this way. My name is Jordan, and my pronouns are she, her. You could also use he, him, they, them. There are other options, but these are maybe the three most popular. Let's look at another example. So we watch TV while she do her homework. See that word while? There are some actions happening at the same time. So we see that there is this process of we watch. So somebody is doing that. Okay, we, subject, we. We was or we were? We were watching while she was or she were? She was doing her homework. So again, both of these actions, longer processes, they're occurring at the same time. Thank you, while, for telling us that. Okay, she performed last night. Okay. She was, she were. Is this simple past? Ooh, this one's a little confusing, especially if you just watched my video on simple past. So could we say she performed last night? Yeah, of course. Yes, we could definitely say that. Another acceptable way to speak is to say she was performing last night. Maybe the original question was, what was she doing last night? In that case, we want to use past continuous. But again, if you use simple past here, that's totally fine. They both have the same meaning, but maybe they paint a different picture. Maybe they describe reality in a different way. Because using past continuous, that makes our brains think of, again, the longer process of something happening. But both are grammatically just fine. Okay. When I called her, she work. Okay, she was or were, was working. She was working. Now, can I use simple past here? When I called her, she worked. You could, but it would have a very different meaning. This sentence, again, describes the interruption. So she was working. She was in the middle of doing a task when I called her. So she stopped working when I called. My siblings ride their bikes all day. So my siblings, that could mean my brothers, my sisters, the other children from my parents or whoever. All right. So we have plural. My siblings were or was? Were. My siblings were riding their bikes all day. So again, can I use simple past here? My siblings rode their bikes all day. Yeah, that's totally fine. Again, with past continuous, we are painting a different picture. It has a different feeling. When we see past continuous, my siblings were riding, we can imagine this happening, like really happening all day. We get a much different feeling with past continuous. But can we grammatically say my siblings rode their bikes all day? Yeah, of course. Of course. I want to leave you with a note on verb tenses. In some cases, yeah, using the correct verb tense is important. Like if you are talking about the present and the past and the future, those are all different times. So, yes, it is technically important to use the correct verb tense. But also, in many cases in English, it's okay if you make mistakes with verb tenses or use a variety of verb tenses. Some things I want you to remember are that learning verb tenses helps us to describe our reality more clearly to other people. So if you use the past instead of the future, that's a very different reality, right? So you may want to use a certain verb tense to make sure the other person really understands you. But again, even if you make mistakes, when you have the conversation with someone, things will become clearer. You don't always need 100% correct grammar to express your ideas. So that brings me to my second point, that you won't get things perfectly all the time. You won't always sound like a native speaker, and that's totally fine. Most people who speak English in the world are non-native speakers. There are a variety of ways of speaking English, and English is an international language. The most important thing is, can people understand you? Can you communicate? Can you get your idea across? And lastly, when we learn new verb tenses, in many cases, these verb tenses just allow us to be more creative. So for example, the past continuous in many cases is really not very different from the simple past. It is a little bit, but not in big ways. We use past continuous in many cases just to, as I said, paint a different picture, to emphasize a process. That's all we're doing here. So thanks for practicing with me today. I know that as we learn more verb tenses, it will be confusing, and you may get frustrated that there is not always one very clear answer. But again, remember that you are learning this language to practice with people, Nobody is perfect with language. Nobody, not even me. But again, the purpose of language is to communicate. That's your goal. So don't be too hard on yourself if you make mistakes. What's a mistake? I don't know. Anyway, thanks. And I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Keep working hard, and I'll see you in the next video.